Okay, how's it going, everybody? So we're going to read some Mao Zedong today. This is "Win the Masses in Their Millions for the Anti-Japanese National United Front." So it's got a few sections here. We're going to read this first section here. This is the question of peace, and it's got an introduction too. So I'm going to write it. So for this reading, I'm just going to read the introduction and the question of peace. Let's go ahead and get into this. Comrades, in the course of the discussions of the last few days, you have expressed agreement with my report. Quote, the task of the Chinese Communist Party in the period of resistance to Japan, end quote. Only a few comrades expressed different views. As these dissenting views were rather significant, I shall discuss them first in my concluding speech before dealing with certain other problems. Okay, so this is the question of peace. For nearly 2 years, our party has fought for internal peace. After the third plenary session of the Kuomintang Central Executive Committee, we declared that peace had been attained, that the stage of fighting for peace was over, and that the new task was to consolidate the peace. We also pointed out that this new task was linked with fighting for democracy, i.e., consolidating the peace by fighting for democracy. However, some comrades argued that this view of ours is untenable. It follows that they must either arrive at the opposite view or hover between the two. For they argue, quote, Japan is retreating and Nanking is wavering more than ever. The contradiction between the two countries is becoming weaker, and the contradiction within the unity is growing sharper, end quote. Naturally, according to this appraisal, there is no new stage or new task, and the situation has reverted to its old stage, or even deteriorated. I think this view is incorrect. In saying that peace has been attained, we do not mean that it is consolidated. On the contrary, we have said that it is not consolidated. Bringing about peace and consolidating it are two different things. History might reverse its course for a while, and peace might meet with setbacks because of the existence of Japanese imperialism, traitors, and the pro-Japanese group. But the fact is that peace was attained after the Xi'an incident, and was the product of several factors. Japan's fundamental policy of invasion, the favorable attitude of the Soviet Union and also Britain, the United States and France towards internal peace in China, the pressure of the Chinese people, the Communist Party's peace policy during the Xi'an incident, and its policy for ending the antagonism between the two regimes. The differentiation within the bourgeoisie, the differentiation within the Kuomintang, and so on. Peace cannot be made or unmade by Chiang Kai-shek alone. To unmake it, he would have to fight against many forces and draw closer to the Japanese imperialists and the pro-Japanese group. There is no doubt that the Japanese imperialists and the pro-Japanese group are still endeavoring to prolong civil war in China. That is precisely why peace is not yet consolidated. Such being the case, we have come to the conclusion that instead of reverting to the old slogans of, quote, end the civil war, end quote, and, quote, fight for peace, end quote, we should take a step forward and adopt the new slogan of, quote, fight for democracy, end quote. For this is the only way to consolidate internal peace and bring the war of resistance against Japan into being. Why do we put forward the three closely related slogans of consolidate the peace, fight for democracy, and carry out armed resistance? The answer is that we desire to push the wheel of revolution forward and that circumstances allow us to do so. Those who deny the new stage and the new task and who deny the Kuomintang have begun to change, and by the same logic, also deny the achievements of all the forces that have been struggling for peace during the last year and a half will remain where they were before, without advancing an inch. Why do these comrades make such an unsound appraisal? Because in weighing up the current situation, they start not from fundamentals, but from a number of limited and transient phenomena. Sago's diplomacy, the Suchow trial, the suppression of strikes, the eastward transfer of the Northeastern Army, General Yang Hu-cheng's journey abroad, and so on. Hence, their dismal picture. We say that the Kuomintang has begun to change, and we also say that it has not changed completely. It is inconceivable that the Kuomintang reactionary policy over the past 10 years will completely change without new efforts, without more and greater efforts. And on our part, and on the part of the people, quite a number of reputedly left people who often bitterly denounced the Kuomintang and who during the Xi'an incident advocated putting Chiang to death and, quote, fighting our way through Tung Quan, end quote, are now astonished when events like the Suchow trial occur immediately after peace is attained, and ask, quote, why does Chiang Kai-shek still do such things, end quote. They ought to understand that neither the communists nor Chiang Kai-shek are gods, nor are they isolated individuals, but members of a party or a class. The Communist Party can push the revolution forward by degrees, but cannot clear away all the evils in the country overnight. Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang have begun to change, but the accumulated filth of the past 10 years will certainly not be rapidly removed without great effort on the part of the whole people. We maintain that the trend is towards peace, democracy, and resistance, but this does not imply that the old evils, civil war, dictatorship, and non-resistance, will be swept away without any effort. It is only through struggle and hard work, and over a long period too, that we can eliminate the old evils, the old filth, and prevent setbacks, or even reversals in the solution. Quote, they are bent on destroying us, end quote. Quite true. They are always trying to destroy us. I fully admit the soundness of this appraisal, and indeed, one would have to be fast asleep to overlook the point. But the question is whether there has been any change in the way they are trying to destroy us. I think there has been. The change is from war and massacre to reform and deceit. From a tough policy to a soft one. From a military to a political policy. Why has there been such a change? Confronted with Japanese imperialism, the bourgeoisie and the Kuomintang are temporarily forced to seek an ally in the proletariat, just as we are seeking an ally in the bourgeoisie. We should take this as our point of departure in considering the question. Internationally, for a similar reason, the French government has changed from hostility towards the Soviet Union to alliance with it. Our domestic task has changed from a military to a political one. We, for our part, have no use for plotting or scheming. Our aim is to defeat Japanese imperialism in a common effort by uniting with all those members of the bourgeoisie and the Kuomintang who favor resistance. Okay, so that's the first part of this. That's the question of peace. This is win the masses and their millions for the anti-Japanese National United Front. So we'll get into more of this. We have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 more parts. There's 3 parts here at the end that are really short, and so we'll read those all together. And yeah, that is, let's see some notes out of this one real quick. See how many were in here. There's 6 notes. So the first 6 notes they have here, or, Mao Zedong wrote himself, I believe. It says, notes, the Japanese imperialists made temporary conciliatory efforts, their gestures, after the Xi'an incident. I think this is Mao that wrote this. Who wrote these? Trying to see who wrote it. I assume it might have been him, adding notes at the end. Okay, so 1, the Japanese imperialists made temporary conciliatory gestures after the Xi'an incident in order to introduce the Kuomintang authorities to disrupt the internal peace which was being restored and to break up the anti-Japanese National United Front which was taking shape. They arranged for the bogus autonomous government of Inner Mongolia under their control to release 2 messages, one in December of 1936 and another in March of 1937, pledging allegiance to the Kuomintang government in Nanking. And the Japanese foreign minister, Sago himself, publicly wooed Chiang Kai-shek, slyly declaring that Japan would improve its relations with China and help China achieve political unification and economic recovery. Furthermore, Japan sent a so-called economic study group headed by Kinji Kodama, a Japanese financial magnate, ostensibly to help China, quote, complete the organization of a modern state, end quote. These were schemes for the aggression and were known as Sago's diplomacy. They were called a, quote, retreat on the part of Japan, end quote, by those people who were deluded by the Japanese imperialist make-believe. Number 2. In April 1937, the Kuomintang High Court in Suchow tried Shin Chun-ju and 6 other leaders of the Resist Japan and Save the Nation movement, who had been arrested in November 1936 in Shanghai. The charge was endangering the Republic. The usual trumped-up indictment the reactionary Kuomintang authorities used to stigmatize all patriotic movements. Number 3. Prior to the Xi'an incident, the Northeastern Army was stationed on the border between Shinsi and Gansu provinces and was in direct contact with the Red Army in northern Shinsi. Greatly influenced by the Red Army, it subsequently staged the coup in Xi'an. In March 1937, the Northeastern Army was forced to go east to Honan and Anhui provinces, a move taken by the Kuomintang reactionaries to cut it off from contact with the Red Army. At the same time, the so discord in its ranks. Number 4. General Yang Hucheng was a military leader in China's northwest who staged the Xi'an incident together with Cheng Sui-lang. Thus, the prime movers in this incident were properly linked together with the double-barreled surname Chang Yang. When Chiang Kai-shek was released, Chang accompanied him to Nanking but was immediately placed under detention. In April 1937, Yang, too, was ousted from his post by the Kuomintang reactionaries and had to take leave of absence abroad. When the War of Resistance began, Yang returned to China to offer his services, only to be intended by Chiang Kai-shek for the rest of his life in September 1949. When the People's Liberation Army was driving forward near Chongqing, the Kuomintang had him murdered in a concentration camp. Number 5. Tung is a strategically important gateway on the borders of Shanxi, Honan, and Shanxi. At the time of the Xi'an incident, the Kuomintang troops were mainly quartered east of it. Certainly, reputedly, quote, left people in the party like Chang Kuo-tao, and then urged that the Red Army should, quote, fight its way through Tung Quan, end quote, which meant that the Red Army should mount an offensive against the Kuomintang troops. This proposal ran counter to the Central Committee's policy for a peaceful settlement of the Xi'an incident. Number 6. For a long time after the October Revolution, the French imperialists pursued a hostile policy towards the Soviet Union. From 1918 to 1920, the French government took an active part in the armed intervention by 14 powers against the Soviet Union, and it continued its reactionary policy of isolating the Soviet Union, even after the intervention failed. It was not until May 1935 that, under the influence of Soviet Union's peace policy among the French people, and because of the German fascist menace, France concluded a treaty of mutual assistance with the Soviet Union, though her reactionary government failed to observe it. Okay, so yeah, that is the question of peace. Those were the notes that were all in the question of peace. So yeah, thank y'all for tuning in. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, subscribe, hit the notification bell. All of these are Marxists. Hit me up there. Y'all have a great day. Dodada goi.